so good to have you all singing with us this morning.
Amen.
It sounded, you know what was so much fun is I thought about these songs. I mean, all this got thrown together pretty quickly because I've been gone these last 2 weeks. And so we were doing this all by emails and texts and such kind of messages. And I thought, okay, these are all good. They all have the title of love in them. And so that would be kind of a nice consistent theme. And then I look up at the words, and there's a flood, and then there's love throwing a line, and there's Sting who's sending out an SOS. And I'm thinking, God, I love this worship service. It's just so much fun to get to be creative and create narrative that shows us how much of life is imbued with God's sacred presence, with the sacred presence of the divine and even the most secular of songs. I'm excited to be back, but I have to tell you, Linda's preaching. My wife, she's preaching over in the main service, and I look out and I see a couple of folks I know who always tell me, they come up and they say, Tom, I'm sorry, but if your wife's preaching, I ain't in here. And so I know they're going to be over there, so don't get up and leave if you didn't know she was preaching, and now you know. But then I look back, and then I see our senior minister, Tim Brewster's in the back, and he's back there with his wife, Susan. And we got to be with Tim and his wife, and Linda, and Chuck, and Peggy Graff, the organist, and Chuck's wife. We were all up in northern Michigan working at this Chautauqua, doing these lectures and stuff, and Tim did the preaching and a lecture. And so it was great fun to be with them, and honestly, with my boss in here, I wonder if you would mind if I just have a quick prayer. Oh, my God. So anyway, I'm not the least bit anxious. Honestly, Tim flies as well. He's got a pilot's license, and he flew up there with Susan from here. It's a long flight, but he flew us over to Mackinac Island from where we were in northern Michigan. It was a 10-minute flight. It was like a 50-minute checklist, before you take off, which I really appreciated. But it was amazing. But what I really appreciate is the fact that he's in here, and that in some limited sort of sense, he's entrusted in me this opportunity to kind of pilot our service this morning as we think about this interesting story. So hopefully we won't crash. So I want to think with you about this story. And as I was coming in this morning, a couple of folks approached me and said, "Really, you're going to talk about this story?" God said, "What a waste. Let's just call the whole thing off." So here we keep this in mind. Let's call it a wash, which means a couple of things, obviously, but we'll come back to that. And I want to think with you about how there's more than what meets the eye in these stories. So Rob Bell tells this story of being at the airport. He calls it Larry at the airport. He says, you're at a baggage claim area, and it's going to be a little while before your bags are unloaded, right? You've all been there. Most of us been in airports, seen this scene play out. So you decide to play this game called, what's going on with those people over there? And you just start sort of thinking about what's happening as these narratives come together after getting off the plane, people coming to greet other people. And you notice a man and a woman walk up to each other and they embrace. You don't know anything about the couple. You don't know where they've come from. You're not sure which one's visiting and which one's returning or which one lives there. But this happens all the time at the airport. And you're not even sure if they're wife or husband or brother or sister. All you see is two people walked up to each other, a man and a woman, and they embrace. However, if you're like me, or if you're like a lot of people, you are clearly about to make a lot of assumptions. So let's imagine that what happens when you actually do know something about these two. Imagine you learn that they are actually brother and sister, and she's been working as a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya. And she got news that their father has been diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumor. So she dropped what she was doing, and she's got a flight as quick as she could to make a trip home, and her brother has come to pick her up. And she has so much she wants to say to her father, and so much to hear from him before it's too late. And they're headed straight from the airport to the hospital where the rest of the family is awaiting, and they haven't been together in over a year, and there's tensions there too, and there's some estrangement there, and yet now they know they embrace brother and sister because they know something strange and scary and deeply meaningful is about to happen that will probably change them for the rest of their lives. Or let's say that they're husband and wife. And she had always wanted to be a sculptor and had always known she had the talent, but then she got married and they had children early on, and then one led to another, and now they have 3 kids and after-school programs that they have to tend to, and a house that's always in continual need of repair and updating, and she works a job and he works a job, and she tries to come home early to take care of things, and they're doing fine, but she's had to put her dream of being an artist, her passion, on the back burner to where finally it just simply died. And then she turns 44 and something deep stirs within. Something gnawing explodes to the surface, and she's in this deep, frustrating pain and longing and confusion, and so she shares it with her husband, that she hasn't been true to herself all these years, and to her surprise, he suggests that maybe she needs to pull back on her work hours. He suggests that maybe they take that extra room he's using simply as an extra study, and they turn that into a studio. And then for the next 3 years, she's working, when she has time, she's working on sculptures, she's working on her craft, she's finding this new sense of who she is and what she has to give. And they're meeting now for the first time because she's returning from New York, where she went to her first art fest and sold 2 pieces and signed with a gallery to create 3 more to show in the next year or so. And they're embracing now because they've both found a new kind of life, a shared kind of reality, something that involves sacrifice on both sides, something that involves discovery on both sides. And so now they celebrate this kind of exhaustive but exciting life. And he realizes also, among all the other celebrations, all the reasons to celebrate, that he will never again have to explain his golf clubs. So many possible narratives are going on, but now you're aware of the background. Now you're privy to what's going on beneath the obvious, so you share in this narrative, and you're anticipating and curious and far more attentive to what's possible. Why? Because you know stuff. Because you know something. But now let's say your friend Larry just comes back from the bathroom. Remember, this story is called Larry at the Airport. Imagine that Larry comes back from the bathroom and he's chattering because he was frustrated about the dryer there. You have to stick your hands in, then it wasn't working. So he's just got wet hands, and it won't dry. And then he wipes them off, and he's embarrassed about that because now people are going to think he had kind of an accident when he walks out with the water on his pants. And he's talking about this when he noticed that his friend, you, are sitting there staring at this couple, engrossed, enchanted, and he has no idea why you're staring. He looks up and says, "You're just stalking them." What do you tell him? What can you tell him? How would you tell him? That's what's going on in our story of Noah this morning. What's going on is this story that we have very little idea of the background, or most of us. If you've done a lot of research, if you've done a lot of biblical study, if you've done a lot of critical study, you might then know some of what's going on in the background. But to the average person reading the story, it just looks like God really got angry and is impatient and kind of capricious and just decided to give up on the human race. It's a mistake. And you can kind of look around today and go, yeah, I get it. You can do that. You could do that. Some of you do that every day when you're driving on the highway or when you're at Walmart. Well, I shouldn't have said that. Or wherever you are. I mean, look, I bought my pants at Walmart last week, okay? I love going to Walmart. So, but at any rate, you get what I'm saying. We make judgment calls on people, on things all the time. We get impatient. We're put off by the reality of pain and suffering in the world and the reality of evil and cruelty in the world. And you're thinking, I get wanting to do a flood. I get that. Is that what this story is about, though? Is that really what's going on here? And what I want to suggest to you is that there's something completely different going on here. Something quite really amazing when you think about it. And that's what this series, by the way, is about. Why is that story in there? Is this series. And I'll be sharing some stories, and Sharm and Linda will share some stories over the next 4 to 6 weeks as we talk about these strange stories and why are they there? What are they really all about? So for this one, what we have to realize is that the Near East had several flood stories that have been going on. First, there was the Babylonian epic. It was called Gilgamesh epic. And I'm not even going to begin to pronounce the hero's name in that. but I'll just summarize it for you. And then, of course, we have, I'll put it down here, Noah's story. What's interesting is that they both follow the same pattern. They're both very similar. They both start with divinity, getting mad at creation. They both start with the God finally saying, you know what, I'm done, I'm had it, I'm going to finish him off, I'm going to wipe him out. In the Gilgamesh epic, God turns to the hero and says, here's what I want you to do. Take your house, deconstruct it, take all the wood, build a boat, put all the animals in. The animals, they came in by twosies, animals, they came in. Elephants and... Oh my God, you poor people. You all were there with me. Oh, I don't know what to think anymore. Anyway, what a cute story, right? So, yeah, but it's the same story. Bring them all in, two by twos, male and female. Bring all those animals in. And then I want you to get out into the water and sail. The only difference with the Gilgamesh epic, at least one major difference, is that the gods end up going on the boat too. And while the gods are on the boat, they start getting scared for what they just did. They start kind of panicking because things are getting out of control. But in the end, all of life is wiped out, and they land the boat, and they walk off. They leave, as if to say, now behave. No be fruitful and multiply, no response that we're so familiar with the Noah story. Now, the Noah story has the same kind of beginning. God gets angry. God looks around. God finds one guy that looks honorable, Noah. And apparently his family is okay too, because he says bring them along. But that's it. Then bring all the animals in 2 by 2 and then get on board. Now, I always think what's interesting about this story, of course, is all the possible inconsistencies. I love it when people say, you know, it really happened. Now, I'm going to step on some toes, perhaps. I hope not. Remember, this is my point of view. This is what I'm thinking right now. If you think it's all bunk, that's fine. You can tell me later. But honestly, that's not what this story is about. To hear this story as a historical tale is to miss the point altogether, literally miss the point of what this story has to tell us altogether, which is what we often do when we start taking things literally. It's easier sometimes, to be quite honest with you. It's a lot easier to take things literally, because then we can point fingers and we can kind of come up with excuses. And if you read a lot of psychology books, they'll even show you where corporate sin is a lot easier when you think about sin just being universal. It's easier to do sinful stuff because, well, you know, we're human. But this is not about that. This is about something far more transformative and amazing. So we have to step past that. But given that, what happened to the fishes? Reminds me of the story my uncle used to tell me about the fish that he taught how to walk out of water and then put it back in water and it drowned. Because he loved telling me these tall tales like that, right? So what happened to the fish? They were just swimming around, you know, all the same. But what about the birds in the air? A lot of them still flying around and stuff. I mean, there's a lot of fun inconsistencies in this story just as you begin to take it apart. It's not what it's about. It's not what the story's all about. The Sumerian myth is based on the same premises. The humans get haughty, they send out a hero, and then there's a flood. The difference is that whereas the first one starts as a cautionary tale, you better watch out, you better behave, because if you don't, then God is going to come and take it all away. The Bible story ends differently. We didn't read the ending, but you go on to another chapter and you read the ending and you find out that God says, this one is watch out. This one is, you ready? I'm sorry. God says at the beginning of the story, I'm sorry I made you guys. God says at the end of the story, I'm sorry I did this. This won't ever happen again. And so God then, as you remember in the story, does what? Puts in the sky a rainbow to remind them that I've made this covenant with you, with humanity. Not just with humanity, it says I've made this covenant with all creation, that I will never again destroy anything with a flood. I will never again destroy. I'm sorry I did that. And what's interesting is that in this one, then God creates covenant. Now, if you know what covenant means, it means relationship. Skip on ahead to Paul the Apostle many years later, and we have the ground of being, the one in whom we live and move and have our being. We are connected. So all the folks, all the preachers, I used to go to Northwest Bible Church in Fort Worth here years and years and years and years ago. And I remember Dr. Madison, who eventually became the president of Calvary Bible College. I got into this discussion with him over things like this. And I said, is everything going to be destroyed? Is God just going to get mad and destroy everything? And he would always say, if God wants to, God is going to do it. And I said, yeah, but what about Jesus and the commandment to love your neighbor, love your enemy, all of those kinds of things? And he said, just look at Judges. God will kill people if God feels like it. So we better be on our best behavior. And so I said, so my whole relationship with God is lived in fear. And he said, it's lived in honor. And I said, sounds like a lot of fear to me. So we always went back and forth about this and never did agree on it. But here I want to take just a quick moment. Hold on to this idea of the difference between these two stories. And one thing in particular, just how radical it was. This happened, this was written down around 950 BC, thereabouts. And it's written in a time where the Babylonians were all around, and then Sumerians prior to that. And this epic that had been around, this kind of story that had been around, was always just how you explained things. When crops don't come up, the gods are mad. When my baby's born stillbirth, the gods are mad. When my animals can't give birth, the gods are mad. When things happen the way I like them, the gods are happy. That was the way you explained things. This story suddenly says something else. Suddenly says, God goes with us, and I'm sorry that I did this. Let's have a relationship. It's a completely different understanding of the divine in the world. It completely transformed it. Now, it's not to say that they were enlightened, that they understood history, or they understood science. I mean, the very fact of a rainbow. Let's talk about rainbows for a minute. You know what a rainbow is, right? Rainbow's a meteorological phenomenon that's caused by reflection, refraction, and dispersion of light and droplets of water, resulting in a spectrum of light that is only visible at an angle of 42 degrees with the sun behind your back. Did you know that? Did you know when you try to follow that rainbow and get closer, it disappears? Do you know why? You're no longer at 42 degrees. However, if you're there and you're looking at a person in front of you who's looking at the rainbow, guess what? They don't see the same rainbow because they're looking at their 42 degrees. Rainbows are capricious. They're unpredictable. They're illusions. I mean, if you read it literally, basically God says, I'm putting up illusion. Ha, joke's on you. But then if you read behind that, if you think about it, if you ask questions, wait a minute, what's really going on here? Then it's fascinating. Because the reality is, rainbows are always there. All you need is water and light, and the rainbows appear. Provided you're standing at the right angle. But rainbows are always there. They're always waiting to happen. Which to me says something fascinating about the reality of God's presence in the world. Even though they didn't understand what they were talking about, they were simply explaining that if you noticed after a big storm, there's often a rainbow. Well, that's God's sign of love and hope. But what it says to me is that God's presence is always present, that life is always filled with this possibility, that no matter what we do, love will always find us. It's not a matter of, listen, I'm going to be with you as long as you go ahead and behave yourself. It doesn't say that. It just says, I've changed my mind. I'm just going to be there all the time. I'm just going to be there. I'm not going to destroy things anymore. Period. Doesn't say as long as you behave yourself. It's this idea that no matter what we do, we are always in the presence of God. By the way, here's how you remember something. You ready? You know what colors are in a rainbow? I didn't know this. I just learned this the other day, so I'm giving it to you for free. Have you heard this? Richard of York gave battle in vain. Because don't you always sit there and argue with your spouse? Don't you see that violet there? Don't you see that pink in there? And you're going like, it's not pink, it's violet, or it's red, or it's orange. Richard of York gave battle in vain. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Say it with me. Richard of York gave battle in vain. That didn't cost you anything. So here's the idea that I want to conclude with. All this science about rainbows and all of this idea about epics and ancient epics and what the Noah story is telling us. Naomi Shihab Nye, the poet, tells this wonderful story about being at the airport and hearing a warning going on, or an alert going off that needs somebody quick to come to gate 4A. It's a wonderful story that she tells in her collections. And I'll just summarize it quickly. She goes there and she sees a Palestinian woman, complete in traditional garb, on the floor wailing and screaming. And nobody understands Arabic, and so nobody can understand what she's saying. Naomi Shihab Nile grew up with a Palestinian father. She knew a little bit about the language. She begins to speak to her in some rough language as best she can. Everyone else has been anxious, right? Everyone else has been afraid. They've all been backing off. This woman wailing almost violently in the middle of the floor. And what she finds out is that she's wailing because she doesn't understand that the flight's just been delayed. It hasn't been canceled. It's delayed. But all of her efforts have been on making this flight because she's to get a medical procedure at the destination. So now she won't make the flight. Now she won't make the medical procedure. And so Naomi Shihab Nile calms her down, and they begin to talk. And she even calls her brother, because now she can speak Arabic, and so she calls her brother for her, and then she gets on the phone with her sister. He gets on the phone with her sister. And then Naomi calls her father, who speaks Arabic, and they start talking, and then her father realizes they have 10 friends in common, and then so they start talking about that. And before you know it, the woman has reached into her purse, and she's pulled out these sugar cookies, and everyone is eating cookies. What started with fear, what started with the possibility of destruction and fear and violence and all of the imaginable kinds of things that happen when we make assumptions, suddenly opened up when we took the risk to connect. The rainbows are always there. The connection is always there. The ground of being is always there. The storms will still come. Read the rest of the story. Noah gets mad at his son Ham because Noah got drunk and he was exposed naked in his tent, and Ham comes in and sees him naked, goes and tells his 2 brothers about it, and the brothers come in and ritually cover him up not to look at their father so as not to disgrace him. It was a complete total accident. Noah looks at Ham, says, "Cursed are you. Your people are going to be slaves to your brothers for the rest of your lives. Goodbye." Nothing really changed, right? Good old Noah still was power, greed-oriented, power struggle, family dramatics. Life goes on. There's a difference. So does God. The rainbow's always there. In the midst of the storm, there's always a way. Love will find you. There's always a connection to that place. I'll invite the band to come on up now and just recap real quickly. What's fascinating about this story when you start to read beneath it is that there's more than meets the eye. It's a story of transformation. But I want to suggest to you something kind of interesting. I want to think of it as a story of baptism, because it transforms the way the world experiences God from then on. It's a baptism. It's not a wash. It's not a deluge. It's not a starting over, as if you could ever start over with a clean slate. It's a walking through and experiencing the transformation that happens because of your willingness to take that journey. It's turning the chaos narratives into quest narratives. And when that happens, we experience the depth of God's presence. The old is still there. Life is still full of suffering. The old hasn't passed away, but this story reminds us that the redemptive flood is about God's ultimate grace. So now we pay attention. As Sharm had done wonderfully and shared with us in her story of in her Kairos story, we pay attention and we notice that at the very heart of being is this connection of God's love, is this covenant of God at the heart of life. It shows up like a rainbow. It's in the story or the song of Somewhere Over the Rainbow Meets What a Wonderful World. It's in the song Blackbird, singing in the dead of the night. Take the broken wings, learn to fly. Take the sunken eyes, learn to see things all anew. What Paul Tillich says is we are in this relationship regardless of whether we know it or not. I'll repeat that one last time. What the story tells us and what Paul Tillich much later tells us. We are in this relationship regardless of whether we know it or not. Regardless of whether we know what's happening or not. But if we do, what a difference that makes.